Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I hope you're all well and keeping safe. Some of you may know that the archaeologist Dr. Oliver O'Grady died suddenly a few weeks ago. He led many community archaeology projects and had a great capacity to engage with the ordinary folk who came along to help. We experienced this ourselves when working with him, and he was also involved in a number of other local projects, not least several digs on East Lomond. This presentation seems a fitting tribute, as well as a chance to explore the discoveries made on the hill over 2014, 17 and 19. Okay, so on to the video. And let's see how we go.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you all for staying on to hear the last two presentations. Mike and I are sworn to make this an exciting time of the day, so let's hope we can repay your faith in staying with us. As Rachel said, Oliver had unfortunately to cancel due to family circumstances late on, but helpfully he sent me copious technical notes late last night, which I've spent most of the day trying to digest. And hopefully we can represent pretty fairly what we did on East Lomond. Now, I know in the audience, I see a number of faces who were there on the excavation. There's at least, I think, about a dozen of the excavators here. There are also a number of others who came to visit us up on site, and we took a tour of what was happening. So some of the stuff that I'm going to present to you, you may have seen already because we have talked at TAFAC before. I'm going to quickly skip from the 214 excavation to the 217 and then on to 219, because this is an evolving story. And as I hope to show you today, it's an evolving story that could take us decades into the future working on East Lomond. It is that significant. So without further ado, there's more to this than meets the eye, EL19 presentation. And I'm going to start with this image, which I know many of you are familiar with. This is the historic illustration by Bob Marshall, a respected illustrator, who walked over the hill with Oliver O'Grady and myself in 2014. And it is still pretty accurate. This is much more than a best guess. The scale of the hill, the topography, where the walls are, is all accurate. And I think the only thing I would say from this year's excavation is that this annex here actually is much larger than we originally thought in 2014. And I'll show you an image which might blow your mind in that respect. But that's a fairly good image of what East Lomond looked like in the post-Roman, in the Pictish period. Some of the finds which were diagnostic in 2014, shale armlets and bangles, and we find more shale on each of the excavations, and cannel coal and possible jet. Too fast. The kitchen tools, the possible hammerstones, quern fragments, spindle whorls, whetstones, what you would expect to find in a significant settlement, but also the crucible fragment, indicating that there's other kinds of activity going on up there bar the domestic crucible fragment used for smelting. So that was 14. So at the end of our 14 excavation, these were the conclusions that we were drawing from that initial trench, a 5 by 10 metre trench in 14. I won't go over them. We'll have lots of slides backing all this up. But everything was pointing to a high status site. And the Pictish stuff that was coming through, together with the late Roman stuff, was giving us a clear indication that we were dealing with something rather special. So on to 2017. And one of the first things that we excavated, and I know that there are people here who worked on this raised pathway, we have this raised pathway with the large curbstones holding them in. And if you look at the front of this pathway and look at the way that these stones are placed, because some People did come from one of our nearby universities and suggest that this might have been covered with dirt and turf. But we believe that the engineering that is evident at the front of this, it's almost like crazy paving, was too sophisticated to be anything other than a pathway. And when it rains up on that site and becomes claggy, you understand why they would want to build a pathway. It's similar to the one that Peter Yeoman and Steve Driscoll excavated at Edinburgh Castle in the 90s, except theirs was about 150 years after this. The dating, the C14 dating from here is circa 650 AD. And we have this quite extensive pathway up on the hill, which we know veers off into the landscape. We also found in 2017 one of these, and there's one of these displayed in the National Museum in Chambers Street in Edinburgh. And I can recall with great joy the person who was on his first ever excavation, on his first day on the site, and he finds one of these. And it's an ingot mould. And it dates from that post-Roman Pictish period, if you like. The rulers there for the sense of scale. And of course, those of us who attended the various talks that Fraser Hunter's given on Scotland's early silver know that all Scotland's early silver is Roman. And what the Pictish peoples or the local peoples did was melt these down in these moulds. And here's a bar from Fife, from Clatchart Craig, and there's another one from the Gall Crossroad in Aberdeenshire. So they're smelting down Roman silver using these moulds, and they're making these silver bars, which they're trading between the tribes. And what are they doing with these bars? Well, we know what they're doing in Fife. 5-6 miles as the crow flies from East Lomond is Largo Law, Norries Law, and you're looking at the Norries Law Hoard. These, one of which some of you will know is an original, and one of which is a copy by that crooked silversmith in Cooper all those years ago, thanks to Dr. Alice Blackwell's work at the National Museum. But this is the kind of thing they're making with these silver bars. We now have evidence, and more evidence than we had previously, that there's smelting as well as ironworking, as well as blacksmithing going on at the top of East Lomond. This hill that you can normally see from here every day, except on days like this. Okay, this is the 2017 trench, the blue circle area with the raised pathway. Some of you may remember from the last talk we gave this quenching tank here. This whole area is a blacksmithing area full of hammer scale, debris of metalworking, and this quenching tank. The quenching tank, if you recall, for those who've heard this talk before, had that piece of mica schist, that big quarter of a quernstone deposited beside it, which Professor Edinburgh University Geophysics, who came up to the hill, said to me was, this is north of the Highland Fault. This is mica schist from way up north, and it probably dates to that period when the Picts were establishing hegemony after Nectansmuir in the late 7th century. And it's positioned here. It is not a Fife stone. It's a stone that sparkles in the sun. So he's either an itinerant blacksmith, or he's part of that wave that establishes the Pictish kingdoms on the east of Scotland. And of course, we have the earlier phase down at the bottom, and the hearths. So that's indicated in red here. And this was our hearth sequence, again, which is unique in a Scottish context. On the top of a Scottish hill fort, you maybe find 1 or 2 hearths, and it tends to be soil, then you're into the bedrock. But here, if you look closely, you can actually make out a sequence of 5 stacked hearths in the one spot. That's testament to a longevity of occupation on this particular area of the hill that we're excavating over probably 150, 200 years. And beside that, of course, we find various pieces that made up a very interesting assemblage, and it was no different this year. One of the big finds from the 2017 excavation was it extended the sequence of dates that we had on East Lomond. In the first 2014 excavation, we had securely dated samples from 52 AD through to 650 AD, so the first to the 7th centuries in the first millennium. And here we have the remains of a robbed Bronze Age kist. which the girls from St Andrews High School in Kirkcaldy excavated. You can see West Lomond in the background, so it's looking towards West Lomond. And in here, there were two sets of cremated remains, which are Dr. Alison Sheridan rushing across from the National Museum, and she supported us to get a report based on the remains. But that took the dates from 52 AD back to circa 1800 BC. So we began to see that this is a much bigger and longer lived area than we had previously suspected. So why did the 17 excavation excite us? Well, this is an unknown site. I have read so many books and done so much research trying to find a name for this settlement outside the hill fort, outside the scheduled area, and I can't find it. We have a lengthy sequence of occupation from the Bronze Age onwards. We have our soil samples, lots of evidence of contact, including e-ware, which is only found at royal sites, normally on the west coast, comes up through, if it's made in France, it usually comes up through Tintagel and finds its way up to the western side of the country, used to transport oils and dyes that you can't manufacture here. We have lots of evidence of smelting and production, and we have that half sequence. And that turns out to be all in 1% of the size of the site that we now believe we're looking at. So, on to 2019 and this year. And what did we decide to do? Well, we didn't want to put another single deep trench in because you begin to pockmark the site with holes. We didn't want to do that. So we decided as a strategy to commission stage one as a big geophysics scan, and a number of people here came up and helped us with that scan. We brought in a big bit of kit from Germany, took 5 people to manoeuvre over 4 hectares, and we did that over 4 days up on the hill. We involved volunteers in local schools, secondary schools, in the exercise, and we did about circa 4 hectares, and we produced an interpretive report. We wanted to do that scanning in order to determine the potential trench locations for this summer and test the veracity of the scan results. So what you're about to see now, I hope interests you as it interested me when we first saw it. That's the area. Area 1 is the Falkland Estate. We took it out with the scheduled monument area. Area 2 is delineated by a fence, and that's Balbirnie Estate, that's the Balfour land. But Robert Balfour was quite happy that we were able to work on that with him. And this is some of the indicative results of the scan. The blue box that you can see is where we excavated in 14 and 17. The red line that you can see above the scan area is the delineation of the scheduled monument. So we're outside the scheduled monument, we're on the shoulder of the hill. We seem to have a huge boundary wall that encloses a number of areas, quite distinct areas on the shoulder of East Lomond, looking south. So it's overlooking Glenrothes, Kirkcaldy to the Forth and Edinburgh beyond. And the size of this settlement is really quite something. And there's more stuff that has slipped away on the eastern edge of that, as you can see. But you have a natural, because we do have some images of bedrock, we have a natural volcanic feature, and there's a wall which appears to have been built on top of a natural bedrock feature. So you can see when I say we might be doing archaeology up there for another couple of decades, that there's plenty of challenge archaeologically on East Lomond. So our original plan to do a couple of digs and then talk to Historic Environment Scotland about digging in the hill fort may be delayed because there's plenty here to keep us occupied for quite some time. And in relation to Historic Environment Scotland, the Trust has just signed a partnership agreement with Historic Environment Scotland. So we're going to be collaborating when we do our geophysics, and they're doing some of their aerial scanning work. We are going to be collaborating with them as we take the archaeology programme forward on East Lomond. The geophysics report that accompanied that image raises the possibility discovery of a very rare archaeological site of national importance. And we certainly think we're looking at that. And with all applications, we always say, and you could do more. Give us some money and we'll do more for you. And I'm sure we will over a period of time. But we are a trust, we are a charity. So we need to raise the funds to take the archaeology agenda forward on East Lomond. And so to 19, and so to this year. Now, we're very fortunate that we have Oliver working with us. We were also very fortunate on the day that this photograph was taken, because if you remember this year, it was horrendous. This was a very tricky excavation. We lost 3 days because of the weather. Whether it was the rain or the thick mist that you couldn't see feet, never mind anything else around about you. Not all days were like this, but we darted ahead, and here's our camp, and you can see this kind of slightly misty view. We've got a couple of trenches here looking down towards the Forth, and I think we spent quite a lot of time in our tent, but it gives you some idea of the size and scale of where we are. Then we're looking back up towards the ramparts on the top of the hill, and you can see West Lomond away in the background. And here's one of the trenches we took over the boundary wall. But it gives you can see all 4 areas of excavation. There's actually 5, there's one just beyond the horizon. But that gives you some sense of the scale of it. They're on either side of the natural gully, which we believe is the original entranceway into the hill fort. And these shots were made possible by the SCAPE project at Andrews University, and thanks in particular to Ellie Graham, who brought her drone and managed to get some good shots for us before the weather closed in. And in return, we took some of the St Andrews students who can now choose an archaeology module. And we didn't know that because we knew they closed down their archaeology section a number of years ago. But we had some students who were happy to add on to the dig, and in return, quid pro quo, they did the drone work for us. So it was a win-win situation all around. So good battering and good links with our local academic institution. Just to show the area that we're looking at, the red circle is the scheduled monument area, and our trenches are down here. There are 6 identified here. We opened 5 trenches because we did lose 3 days because of the weather. And the trenches are all named, we all have an identifying number. And I'm now going to go through, thanks to Oliver's copious technical notes, I'm now going to go through a couple of slides for each trench and talk to you about what we think we've got this year. Now, we didn't go deep, we went shallow because we were testing the results of the scan. We wanted to see what we were hitting. And it's fair to say that each trench hit solid archaeology, and some very interesting archaeology up on the hill, over an area of about 75 to 80 metres. And you multiply that by another 2, and you'll get some idea of the size of the actual site. So here we go. And bear with me, because I will have to refer to some of the notes I managed to pull together from Oliver's guidance to me. This is an aerial shot. It just gives you a sense of where we are up on the hill. For those of you who know the hill, that's the last gate that you go through when you come up, and that's the van. That gives you some idea of the sense of where we are. So we're on the shoulder before you get to the summit of East Lomond. And the first trench we'll look at is Trench W. And you can begin to make out here a kind of diagonal sweep of stones coming across it. But that's not what we had been looking for. We had been looking for a line of stones that cut straight across this. So this was a surprise, which is why we've taken a slot down even deeper over here. Here's this diagonal wall, which you can see beginning to emerge, and 3 very clear posts. The wood is still in situ, these brown circles that appear for decayed wood, very, very clear. But we still didn't see the straight wall that was cutting right across it. Now, I know that there's someone here who took a particular interest in this particular trench. Down here, you'll see we've put shale working area debris and a copper alloy find. We did find a copper alloy fragment with a stud down here. The shale working area debris was actually a stash of shale in a circular shape, packed in And shale up here is being worked. If you remember the armlet, maybe some of you have heard the 17 talk before, the big armlet that Alice Roberts was very keen to wave about when she was looking at this on the TV. But in here, beside these stones, you have a lot of shale packed together. So this is someone's working assemblage of shale. We already have shale things from up there and shale molds, and we're pretty close to where someone was working, but still we didn't see the straight wall. So we did take that that side over here where the people are standing, we did take that down deeper, and that's what we began to get. This is, it's quite odd when you see things back to front up here and you're looking at it on the screen here, but bear with me. The straight wall begins to become very clear. And in this area here, we find this. And I know the finder is sitting somewhere. Oh yes, he's blushing, he's blushing. It survived Bob's maticking. But it was a pristine piece. And we showed this to Torben Ballen. And Torben came back, immediately said, "This is a beautiful piece. It looks as though it had been knapped yesterday, and it would still cut you." And he described it as a leaf-shaped, drop-shaped, definitely flint, dating to the early Neolithic, 4,000 to 3,500 BC. So our timescales are now going back even further. So that big map, or that indicative map that I showed you, you mustn't think that it was always that size, because I think this settlement has contracted and expanded over several thousand years. And if this dates to 4,000 BC, we're actually talking about 6,000 years of occupation on that hill, and we have a positive palimpsest up there on East Lomond, which is going to keep us, I think, busy for many years to come. So this lower wall that we had been looking for from the scan was actually below the surface, and other things had been superimposed on top, both an arcing circular structure of stone and then a straighter, lighter structure with wooden posts. So on this part of the site, you have had settlement over a very long period of time. It's possible this arrowhead has been washed down from a structure further up, but only further excavation will determine that. I'm going to look now at trenches J1 and J2, which are both prominent anomalies on the hill and in the scan that we did. And J1 proved to be highly productive. I don't know why Oliver has given me this kind of fancy slide. I'm the one kneeling at the trench, and Oliver is gassing away to Peter Yeoman, who's well known of this parish. And Peter came up to visit us on a couple of occasions. As Fife's former county archaeologist, he was interested to see what is going on. And trench 1, we did bring out working debris. Where it says pit, that circular structure there, and I thank Gemma Cruikshanks over at the National Museum of Scotland, who's looked at our ironworking and our slag material. That was a very solid furnace base. So we've come across yet another furnace. And between 14 and 17 and 19, we have at least 3 furnace bases and at least 4 hearths in a fairly small area of East Lomond. We also, if you can look to the right there, here we are. It's a very fine copper ring, which had snapped in 2. That's currently with Will Murray at the Conservation Studio over in Edinburgh. So he's working to get that looking good, and a spindle whorl. So we've got a very busy area, not far below the surface. Most of these trenches are about a foot below the surface. So you're walking over what you think is moorland, but actually not far below the surface. There's a hell of a lot of archaeology sitting there. So trench 1, very productive. The remains of a hearth there as well. And most of the finds are sitting around the hearth. And that echoes what we found in 17, where various bits of armlet and bangles were found around a hearth area. Trench J2, a different kind of trench. We're looking at the partly robbed building remains here. We think we've got a, well, that's it in context of the hill. We actually wondered whether trench trench J1 and J2 were connected. They look as though they might be connected on the scan, but it would have been an enormous trench if and we'd have done nothing else if we just excavated that. So J1's at one side of this structure, J2 is at the other side of this structure. J2 is the one to the bottom of the image here. And this is J2, and we clearly have the terminus of a stone wall footing, which possibly had turf on top of it. That's the yellow line there. So we've got the end point. We've got some post settings around that, and a robbed out paving area, and an incised stone. There's a couple of points to make about trench J2. If indeed it does connect with J1, then you're talking about a very substantial building, almost a Pitcairn type building up there on East Lomond. But that's for speculation, because the thing that we don't have at the moment is C14 dating. We've worked with AOC, who's looked at the charcoal samples, 75% of which can be dated. So we're now at the stage to put them for dating. And we've got certainly the ironworking report from Gemma over at the museum. But let me show you the incised stone. And now, we're going to get some people to look at this because it's a bit of a mystery. These are very definite man-made lines. Now, for all I know, it says number 5, the hill. Who knows? It may say something more significant, but they are certainly man-made. These are not natural fractures on the stone, and they're found at that terminus come entranceway into that side of the building. So what it means, we don't yet know, because we're still in the middle of our post-X work, including the C14 dating. Trench H, this was another very intriguing trench. It appeared to be a square anomaly on the geophysics. And closer up, you can see that we have a line of stones, and there's a whole range of scatter of rubble beyond that. But within that rubble, we have metal working, we have Roman Iron Age material, rotary quern fragments, whetstone fragments, all coming out from in here. The Roman material that we picked up it's a rim sherd, it's red Oxfordshire ware. It's almost identical to some of the Roman material that we picked up in the 2017 excavation. And that site in 17 is about 10 metres to the north of this trench here. Again, without the C14 dating, it's going to be difficult to say too much at this point in time, but we knew we wanted to come and share some of the early findings and some of the images from this year. And then finally, there's Trench X, which we believe is a boundary feature. We thought we'd identified this in 2014. And it's a large wall, and it's located on the break of the slope. And the wall, we believe, is about 2.5 to 3 meters thick. And go back to what I said, when you're walking across this landscape, you think you're just walking on moorland, and about a foot down, you come across rubble, go further down, and you're actually looking at a huge, substantial wall. And this wall runs, we believe, right across the site. I think we have the next image, which shows this. No, that's looking at the wall from above. And you get a sense of, with the 1 meter pole, what we're looking at. Clearly a lot kind of robbed out. But this is what we think, this is where we think the wall runs. It runs right along the side of the hill. Remember that geophysics image that I showed earlier on? This is the main wall. And there's the inner rampart, which delineates the scheduled monument area up top. So what we have here is clear evidence of an outer annex, and we'll await the C14 dates for this to see if it does fit into that pattern of nuclear fort and annex of the early medieval period. Okay. A great big thank you to the team. I told you what it was like on some days. Here's a fairly average day this year. In fact, I think probably most days are like this. I can see some of the colleagues here. I can see Mike and Bob, Mary and a few others who are there, some stalwarts. And I can see you there, Sue, as well. It was a trial, but it was so worth the investment of time and the perseverance. So a great big thank you to the volunteers. I think East Lomond has absolutely enormous potential. We are beginning to think, looking at the size and scale of what we've got here, that it's a kind of sister hill to Traprain. It is that big. It is that big, and it is that deep. And we know in 17, although we went down a metre, we took some more off before we went, and we're still seeing halves that must date back beyond the Iron Age. And that's on one side. So this is something that is going to keep us busy for many years to come. There are lots of questions that are beginning to emerge, not least the development of the kind of southern Pictish area, the emergent kingdoms of southern Pictland from that Roman Iron Age period, and that is one of the intriguing ones. But what we're now seeing with arrowheads from 4000 BC is much, much earlier activity. So there have been people up there working, ruling, living for an awful long time, and it all remains to be unpicked by the gallant band of volunteers who you see here. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for the talk. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that and found it interesting. Thank you for joining us, and good night. Have a good evening.